Kia ora, hello. It's nice to be back in Wellington. I grew up in the Hutt Valley, and now I'm stuck in Auckland. So I lead a 20-year national longitudinal study, the New Zealand Attitudes and Values Study. We're about 8 years into the study thus far. It's a big project. It's a postal questionnaire, right? So we send out a questionnaire to around about 20,000 New Zealanders every year. We started in 2009, and it's a random sample from the electoral roll. Our response rate to the initial sample was about 16.6%, and we do pretty well in terms of representing different ethnic groups, men and women, the different age range, all the different regions of New Zealand. I've put a couple of photos up there. That top one is a random snap of a typical day's mail, and the one at the bottom is a photo I took to send to some of my colleagues around different universities, bragging about what it looks like on a good day when we're heavily into data collection. So we process a lot of mail. And the reason those photos are up there is just to sort of highlight, this is a postal questionnaire study. It's big. There are lots of people involved. You're only seeing me up here, but I'm sort of the tip of the iceberg in terms of our research team. We're spread across pretty much every university in New Zealand now, not quite all of them, but we're growing. So I'm a researcher in social psychology, and a lot of the questions in the New Zealand Attitudes and Values Study are social psychological in nature. So we measure personality, we measure racism, we measure different forms of sexism, we measure feelings toward different ethnic groups, we measure social cohesion and well-being, we measure health outcomes, we measure how much discrimination people report on the basis of religion, on the basis of their gender, on the basis of ethnicity. The list just goes on and on and on, and I'm not going to talk about all of that today. We do measure trust in the police as well, which is interesting in terms of the earlier talks. To give you an idea of our sample size, in 2009 when we started, we had about 6,500 people. 2010, about 4,000. And then we got into booster sampling, so we got some more funding and we're trying to up our sample size. And so it climbs up there about 18,000 people times 5. Times 6 drops down about 15,000. Times 7, updated yesterday before this talk, which is ongoing, why it's in red. We have 11,500 people in the study for this year. So we retain about 80% of the people from the previous wave, which may sort of not sound great depending on whether you're into surveying or not, but trust me, it's really good. It really, really is. It's the best we could possibly do. We send out Christmas cards, we make videos, we use Facebook, we do everything we can to keep people involved. So the data that I will present, I think, are reasonably representative of the New Zealand population. And the key thing is not to be representative at any one point in time, but to be representative in terms of tracking change over time. Now, our study follows the same people over time, and that's the real strength of our project, right, is that about 4,000 odd people who completed the Time 1 questionnaire are still in there completing every wave. There's quite a few people that sort of we might miss for a year, but then we re-find them. So we're following the same group of people, our representative sample over time. So when I talk about change in people, I'm talking about change in the same people over time. I'm not talking about one survey we ran a few years ago comparing the results to a separate survey we've run now. We're following the same people, which is really, really hard to do and really important, I think, if we want to talk about change in things like racism, sexism, stereotypes, discrimination, any of the sorts of issues that we're all interested in here. To tell you a little bit more just about the design of the questionnaire, we also have an online version for people who prefer to complete the questionnaire online, and we have content blocks. So we all get together and we vote on the sections that we're going to rotate in and out on a year-to-year basis. And we've just finished designing our Time 8 questionnaire, and the sort of voting process for that is based on representatives from our advisory board, which spans New Zealand and the universities in it. So the data I'm going to talk to you about today is on ratings of warmth or if you want to give it a more fancy psychological name, an affect thermometer rating. But basically it's a rating of warmth, and you can use the flash label if you want. It's a widely used measure in international research, which is part of the reason we use it in the New Zealand Attitudes and Values study, so that we can maintain comparisons across different nations and sort of show how warm we are in terms of our intergroup relations toward one another relative to other places. So one of the questions, and it's just one section of the questionnaire, we ask people to rate how cold to warm they feel on a scale from 1 cold to 7 warm, so a 1 to 7 scale. And we ask them to rate a variety of social groups and categories. And some of those groups are ethnic or religious groups. The ones I'm going to talk about today are groups we ask people to rate their warmth toward Māori, their warmth toward Asians in general, and that's the label that's given in the questionnaire. The label Pacific Islanders, Muslims, Chinese, New Zealand Europeans, Indians, so on and so forth. So how does that look? Here's data from our latest wave. So this is data from the 2015/2016 wave. This isn't published. The only place you'll see this so far is in this presentation. So sort of hot off the analysis, so to speak. It's a sample-weighted analysis, so it's our best attempt to give a population estimate in terms of the ratings of warmth that we, as the New Zealand population, or a small part of it, but how much the New Zealand population feel warm toward the following different groups. And I've ranked them in order. So of all the groups we study, ratings of warmth toward Muslim peoples are the lowest. And we also have another label in there. We asked for ratings of warmth toward Arab peoples. And the idea there was originally to try and tease out sort of intergroup perceptions on the basis of religion versus a broad ethnic categorization, and it just doesn't work. They correlate almost perfectly, so I'm only presenting the warmth ratings for Muslims here, but if you ask it in terms of people of Arab descent, you see exactly the same thing. So of all of the ethnic groups that we study, this is the group that New Zealand feels the least warm or positive towards. Followed that are ratings of warmth toward Chinese people, Indian people, and ratings based on this category label, Asians in general, which personally I'm not a huge fan of as a label, but it's what we used in the questionnaire because of pilot testing and because a lot of people don't differentiate amongst different Asian ethnic groups. Ratings of warmth toward Pacific Islanders and or Pacific Nations people, but the label we use is Pacific Islanders, again because of pilot testing. Ratings of warmth toward Māori and Pacific peoples are warmer, but they're still not particularly high, and ratings toward New Zealand Europeans, that's the label we use. So ratings toward Pākehā, most people tend to feel the most warm toward them. Again, this is an estimate based on our entire population, not a breakdown by different ethnic groups. The one thing I would point out, and the thing that I think terrifies me the most, is if you look at that 4, that's the neutral point on our scale, right? So Muslim peoples. It's not like people are rating on average, I feel just neutral, neither warm nor cold, indifferent, they're less than indifferent, which is, I would think that 4 should be like a realistic floor for a scale like this, right? You don't see ratings below 4, but you do. And I mean, I do a lot of statistics, right? I don't tend to do interview research at all, but when these questionnaires come in, if you're gonna see a rating of 1 very cold, it's ratings toward Muslim people, so it's really startling how widespread that distribution is. It's very normal, it's sort of a bell-shaped normal distribution that includes a lot of people who rate 1, a lot of people who also rate 7 very warm, most people around the average. So I would suggest that if we want to look in terms of groups in New Zealand society, at least in terms of the ones we've measured, who potentially experience the least positive affect, potentially the most racist sentiment from New Zealand, or from the rest of New Zealand, from New Zealanders, we should be looking at racism toward Muslim or Middle Eastern people more generally, and racism toward Asian people. And probably it's not so important in terms of the stereotypes people hold to differentiate between Southeast Asian or different types of Asian ethnicity, because the stereotype tends to be more general and at a general level. So how are things changing over time? So that's probably some quite depressing data from like the representative study last year, again based on about 15,000 people. We've been tracking change now for 7 odd years. I won't go into the stats behind this. This is a latent growth curve model. So it's our best attempt for modelling change over time. And this is work done by one of my master's students as part of her master's thesis. It's currently under review. So again, you're seeing stuff that's not yet published. What that graph shows is an estimate of the change over time, averaged across everybody in the study, in their warmth toward Asian peoples. And it's a significant model, and what's cool about it is that it's increasing over time. So what we are tracking from 2009 through to 2015 is an effect where warmth ratings, that people in our sample, representative sample, are becoming warmer in their feelings toward Asian peoples over the last 7 years, which is really great. It's significant, it's definitely in the right direction. And the graph in the bottom here is the more honest graph, which is also very, very important to keep in mind. This graph here, the scale, shooting it at my prompt, the scale ranges from 4 to 5, right? That's just so you can see the effect and see the error bars. But the actual scale that we measure ranges from 1 to 7. And here's what that graph looks like when you use the full scale. So many of you could be forgiven for thinking that looks like a straight line or a flat line. It is increasing, but it's a very small effect. So I take 2 things from this. It's going in the right direction, statistically significant increase over time, very, very small, awful long way to go. But hey, at least it's going in the right direction, yeah? I mean, honestly, when I ran the analysis, it was like, please don't be negative. Please don't be a negative effect. I didn't know. Looking around at New Zealand society, I'm not sure I could kind of take the temperature test of that, so to speak. But this is the best temperature test we have, right? A representative sample, most robust analyses I know how to run. And that's what we find. So if we, or when the Human Rights Commission roll out their anti-racism campaign, what we would hope to see, well, for a start, what we should expect to see just based on business as usual is a trend. I'll use the honest graph, that should kind of keep going like that. And what we might hope to see over time is a trend where we change the shape of that function and it increases more steeply. Here's hoping. The New Zealand Attitudes and Values Study will be able to tell you, so I'll keep you posted. That's the end of my talk. And this is not a representative set of photos of everybody involved. It's just for people whose photos I happen to have to hand. But just, it's up there more, there's sort of, I don't know. I think there might be kind of 60 researchers involved in the study, right? I just want to stress, you're only seeing one person up here, but this is a huge team effort. And I'm going to apologise now to people in the room who are involved whose photos are not up here. Yeah, that's me. Cheers.